じゃあ、話を進めるわ。いよいよ最後の犯行についてよ。わかるわよね。潔白の証明のために君たちが最後に狙うことにした相手。その人物に届いた予告状。手紙の宛名は新島さえ。この私。さあ、すべてを説明してちょうだい。
Previously in Persona 5. We're
all gonna die, starting with Griff.
Yeah, that's what we in the business call an oopsie. Granted, they don't at this moment know that someone else killed Okamura. They end up catching that later after the shock is over. But watching someone die on live television, when you're in the presence of their kid, yeah, no one's going to be thinking straight after that. Hell, all Futaba can think about in this moment is this is the exact thing that happened when her mom died. Worse, this is the tipping point for what the majority of the team were worried about in the first place before Morgana did everything to make them go after Okamura. He was too obviously a sacrificial lamb, meant to ruin their reputation by him getting killed right after experiencing a change of heart, to 100% frame the Phantom Thieves for it. They knew this was possible, but Morgana's bullshit distracted them from thinking about it and any possible contingencies. And now even more Sai is gunning for them. Akechi beginning to say that this is irregular in the pattern, but Sai is just so tunnel-visioned at this point on closing the case. And she's a bit paranoid as she's found evidence of someone tampering with, not just copying, the information on her laptop.
小さなエラー表示だったんだけど、それに気づいたのが先月あなたと言い合いになった直後なのよ。
だからって僕？勘弁してくださいよ。
本当に？
足で集めた情報がどれだけ重要かは探偵として分かってるつもりです。僕なりにプライドは持ってますから。さえさんはそういうところ大事にしてくれる人だと思ってました。
Worse, there's more evidence against the thieves planted, there being a calling card discovered in Kobayakawa's former office, that frankly should have been found when he was killed a month ago, meaning it had to have been planted. But by whom? Well, by this guy, of course, who as it turns out has put one of his subordinates up to take the fall. Someone we have grown to know, who they have spent years grooming in the event they needed a sacrificial lamb.
かなりの重責でしょうが、彼女としては光栄なのでは。ずっと追い続けていた廃人化事件の犯人。そうでしたな。我々が仕立て上げた犯人。おっしゃる通り。
The IT head still in control of the Phantom's website begins to span the page with condemnations, spreading the libel like a virus which reshapes the collective consciousness's view about the thieves, which is then taken advantage of by political candidate Shido in his messaging. And thus when the group realizes that they were all set up from the start. Well, okay, not necessarily from the start, but this has definitely been in the works for a while. At least bouncing around the conspiracy's mind since Kamoshida was taken down. Ergo, why the SU director and Kobayakawa's superiors needed their names. Well, that or they thought they could assassinate them the same way they had been for everyone else, but Persona users' shadows don't live in the metaverse, so that wouldn't exactly work. Either way, it seems to have worked out for them. Regardless, the best thing they can do right now is lay low and wait for an opportunity to redeem their reputation. Hell, maybe all it would take is hiring someone to do public relations work for them.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、悪魔のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり。自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
Ichigo Oya has been the reporter we've been encountering ever since the Madarame chapter of the game. Her being a traditional journalist in that she actually investigates the stories she makes, and doesn't base them off of whatever can generate clickbait, or is trapped around the focus of the 24-hour news cycle. She's hyper-competent at her job, making it so her personality and idiosyncrasies that piss off her bosses don't get her fired when her articles inevitably bring flack to their company. Ren's confidant with her is built from him sharing stories of the Phantom Thieves' exploits, under the cover of being a confidential informant, as in Japan there are laws protecting the rights of a source to a story to allow them to remain anonymous, which is another reason why she won't get sacked. As with the Phantom Thieves becoming a sensation in the country, having access to their perspective feeds the interest of the people, and for her superiors that makes her invaluable in the interim. But this angle on her association with us, and her teasing attitude, makes her easily identifiable as the character equivalent to sociopathic reporter Diethard Reed from Code Geass, just without the sociopathy on Oya's behalf. Though she is certainly a schemer in her own right, but it's the blunt way she forces through and delivers her stories that earns her the Devil Tarot, which is based on being direct and forceful, not necessarily evil, at least when the arcana is right side up, whereas when reversed, it can represent true malice, and that evil coming from one's weakness, pettiness, and deliberate blindness. And while her English voice actress Amanda Wynn Lee, better known as portraying Rei Ayanami, Dot Hack's Mimiru, and Persona 4's Yukiko Amagi, is known both behind the mic as well as in person for being a blunt individual that can match well the arcana and role, well, it's more questionable whether that fits her Japanese actress Yumi Uchiyama, as either being a normal role or role subversion. I admit, I'm not actually engaged with many of the series that actress has done, or at least has been prominent in, to be able to get a good read on whether her playing Oya is a role subversion like most of the others are. The best I know of her roles being just Mayumi Kisaki, the manager of Mao in the series The Devil is a Part-Timer. Because of me knowing only of one other role of hers, I can't say for certain whether it applies to the pattern, and I'd rather not go about making an assumption that would prove false. From building her confidant up at least, you gain advantage of not just her publicity, but are able to learn some of her investigative tactics, which is adapted through the gameplay into making it so the security levels in palaces don't increase as quickly if you alert shadows to your presence. Or at least not as much as they did before you got to know her. Now admittedly, this wasn't such a big deal in my case or playthrough. I rarely had to worry about the shadows catching us that frequently, thanks to other confidants I'd leveled and how well the stealth gameplay was handled. Even if I was caught by an ambush out of nowhere, I'd still be able to sneak attack enough enemy shadow parties to lower any race security alert getting caught would cause. It doesn't make your confident ranks worthless, as it still does improve an aspect of gameplay, especially because those security alert percentages enemies trigger when one gets caught do get worse as the game goes on, but it consequently makes Oya's confidant one of the least essential of the non-party ones to do quickly. In truth, Oya's abrasiveness comes from how her immediate boss keeps getting in the way of her investigating matters of government corruption she's regularly heard of, and how such ties into the disappearance of her missing photographer friend Kaio, as her going MIA coincides with her telling Oya she was about to break a new case for them regarding the suspicious dealings of a politician, and Kaio had disappeared right after another politician's death that was then blamed on Kaio. In truth, her boss was acting as the host for a distortion, one deliberately created through which to crack down even more heavily on anyone investigating certain matters or report them to his own superiors, which are suspected to be connected to the conspiracy themselves. But Oya's focus on finding her friend was running aground against the order, thus why it fired off oddly. But with intervention of the Phantom Thieves to clear the distortion, Oya is no longer blockaded from finding her friend, and discovers the politician Kaio was specifically going after was in fact one we are intimately familiar with. Masayoshi Shido, the man who framed Ren for assault. Somehow he caught wind of what Kaio was doing, and after her boss stops blocking her investigation, Oya finds that Kaio had been admitted to a mental hospital a year previously, and is effectively brain dead, her having suffered the type of mental shutdown that doesn't automatically cause one to die. Oya telling of how she's withered away, with no chance of recovery. Fortunately, one of Kaio's accessories held a hidden camera of what she saw, which includes a meeting between all of the corrupt officials in on their scheme, and that can be used against Shido when his other crimes become exposed. But with the power Shido has accumulated through current publicity, painting him as someone who can do no wrong, his support in government, and his financial backers, trying to go against him now is nothing short of suicide. But Oya won't give up. She'll bide her time. As the truth, the whole truth, does matter. As if we can't tell what fact is and what's fiction, then how will anyone ever solve anything when we can't truthfully determine what the problem is?
例の指導の復讐の件もこっそり少しずつ準備を進めてる。必ず真相を暴いてみせるよ。カヨに誓ってね。改めてあんがとね、諦めそうになった時、君が何度も背中を押してくれたんだよ。ここまで来れたの君のおかげね、怪盗くん。あの部長の改心、まんま怪盗事件と一緒の事象じゃん。しかもあのタイミング狙ってやれんの君だけっしょ。ここんとこの取材で確信したんだ。怪盗団ってのは本物の貴族だって。弱者救済、悪党成敗、全部本気でやってんだよね。社会悪を暴きたいって意味では君と私の目的は一緒だろ。だから君の正体についてはする。社会悪と戦うためにここは共同戦線と行こう。君がいなけりゃ戻れなかったよ。ジャーナリストとしての自分にね。情報操作の垂れ込み屋が私の情熱まで操作しちゃってさ。この恩はいつか返させてもらうからね。それまではどっちが悪を暴けるか競争だ。
我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、悪魔の究極なる誹謗に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
But it's not just a matter of fixing the slander the thieves' reputation has become, it's also the emotional state of the newest member, Haru, taking the death of her father hard. And her problems have only increased as her father, and now her, was the majority shareholder in Okamura Foods. While it can be presumed the actions the elder Okamura took that would have warranted their criminal investigation would have died with him, well, Haru's still a teenage girl uncertain of what she even wants to do with her life, now saddled with keeping afloat what her dad built. She's kind enough that just liquidating the assets and closing it down isn't something she would do, as she'd be conscious of all the people it put out of work in doing so.
See, in order to keep this business running, you have to keep this business running.
And as a consequence of her lack of knowledge, she just doesn't know who to trust in keeping things afloat, and who, like her now former fiancé, is just trying to take advantage of her.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち、囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我、女帝のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり。自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
Haru Okamura is the Euphemia Lee Britannia of this storyline, albeit with her forced upon her paramour arc being influenced by Millie Ashford's personal story in Code Geass as well. This is because Haru is a character that keeps trying to make things better for people as she sees things wrong happening around her, but because of her personal ignorance of the world, due to how sheltered she is not aware that she is unintentionally contributing to why things get worse. Unlike Euphemia, Haru isn't unceremoniously killed off to avoid actually dwelling on the consequences of her actions, but instead has to sort out what to do while still mourning her father's recent passing. and working through that with the only personal skill she has. That being, Haru has a fantastic green thumb, able to, with the approval of the school, grow a small supply of small herbs and vegetables on the school's roof, with her able to cultivate and harvest the few crops she's able to grow on a weekly basis, which prove to be excellent support items and how they are a renewable resource of HP and SP regeneration. And oh my yes, there's many people who complained about getting such this late, who did not take well to it finally being included only in the final months of the game's story, especially with how much of a pain it is to gather anything that recovers health and SP in this game. And Haru has been regularly seen around the school to have started her Confidant ranks earlier. To some, it was like rubbing salt in a wound, since, Narukami could grow plants on the hill next to his uncle's place in Persona 4, but we couldn't exactly do that ourselves in 5, now can we? But if you've been stockpiling every recovery item one can, we really don't need them by this point, ironically, making the rewards from her Confidant pointless to many beyond the party member improvement ranking her up provides. But her initiative to just do this at the school is a bit informed by her arcana, as the right side up Empress represents creation, one taking initiative as a means of just being productive, and as a way to avoid dwelling on doubt or to avoid ignorance. Reversed, it represents indecision, allowing one to have their life and agency taken from them as they cannot make a choice for themselves. As, ironically, her growing her own plants, once she turns her mind to cash crops like, say, coffee beans, lead to her finding her own path. Before her father's death, there were plans to expand Okamura Foods out from being a supplier or focusing solely upon fast food, and moving into more cafe-like settings, similar to Sojiro's coffee shop. Sojiro would likely not enjoy the competition. Then again, LeBlanc is already a back-alley cafe as opposed to being a street-side one. But that same kind of soulless, give-them-the-food-and-go experiences are one of the things Haru felt was wrong with her father's business, especially after he was afflicted with the distortion. Thus, she makes the argument through example of the coffee beans she makes, as well as advice from Sojiro on properly utilizing them, that a more personal cafe experience, where they grow the very resources they use, would help them diversify properly while maintaining the quality of the end product that had been abandoned. Now, there's a bunch of logistical problems to a lot of that, one of the major ones being that not every region provides the right nutrients or environment for best growing every type of crop. That is in fact why international trade with regards to food is a thing. I live in Wisconsin, and the best crops to grow here are wheat, corn, soybeans, ground root vegetables, and, surprisingly, half of America's supply of cranberries. And I say surprisingly as I've never seen a cranberry farm in the years I've lived here, as they require more moderate temperatures afforded by living farther from the equator. Coffee, tea, cocoa, herbs, and a lot of spices grow better in hotter climates, where they're unlikely to be hit by a lot of heavy storms. But a lot of those plants also die quickly from direct sunlight and require them to be in shade. So, yeah, deforestation is a big no for those crops as well. Hell, a large reason for why the expensive chocolate has exploded in cost the last several years is because the regions that grew cocoa beans kept suffering crises thanks to deforestation, irregular and more intense weather phenomena caused by climate change, bad conservative foreign policy making it so many of those countries were taken over by dictators that caused the people to seek asylum elsewhere, and those nations trying to grow other food crops for their own use or export thanks to a certain fraudster's trade war making it so there was an embargo on the previous seller of those goods to many countries in need of them. Just to show why the balance of global politics is important. And while you can set up greenhouses for some of those plants to grow them out of season or climate, it consequently increases the expense of growing them immensely as opposed to importing them, let alone having the right soil conditions to grow them in. And even the southernmost landmass of Japan is still too far north to be able to grow coffee well. Hell, considering when this takes place in the story, and the Tokyo area being equivalent in latitude to Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, Well, even cities that far south are still too regularly cold in late fall for good coffee beans to grow there. So how the hell did Haru in November and December make even halfway decent coffee beans for coffee as is presented here? Honestly, it kind of feels like Haru's Confidant was scripted to be available earlier than it was, only for game balance issues and the need for the red herring in the plot to sequester her off. As despite the prior pieces of story already making it clear she wasn't her father's killer, and a disproven red herring for the Black Mask, the idea of keeping it back this long was so you couldn't complete it before the protagonist has his little date with Sai, implying that she is the traitor in our midst even if she isn't the true killer. But like Makoto and Futaba before this, she has the least founded motivations for betraying this group because of what happened to her father. So once again, I feel this entire find the deceptive traitor gimmick to justify the game's flashback framing device to be a complete waste. Especially because, again, those of us playing with the Japanese audio or saw the story parallels immediately latched onto who the conspiracy's assassin was. So it wasn't actually a twist. And Atlas nonsense to preserve the twist became absolutely meaningless. But we're not exactly there yet. Though it is nonetheless a good pitch to the man voted by the board to succeed Okamura in running the company, a man named Takakura, who, while Haru doesn't trust him immediately, does have the business acumen to keep them afloat until Haru is of age and of training to potentially take over, or even run it if she just wants to remain the sole person with controlling interest in the company. Once more, as we discussed at the beginning of this video series, there are multiple circumstances of a family-owned business where no one part of the family knows how or wants to run such, so the duty is then held by another individual who has seniority in the company. And that's what's happening here. But Haru does want to stay involved. That's why she makes her pitch about how to run the initial cafes for their planned chain, and for it to be used as their format for them going forward, allowing for her small-scale circumstances by which to learn and gain the experience to potentially move her way up to running her father's company herself properly when she feels she is ready. Or otherwise, if she finds she feels that's not right for her, to be happy with her own shop. It permits her the options to choose which she had been denied before. And it's frankly what I want to see more of from Yukiko's Confidant in Persona 4. And those are especially the choices she wants to have, which she would not be afforded by this complete jackass who is still declaring that Haru and her company are already his by right of the prior marriage contract her father made. But due to the circumstances of Okamura's death, and the timing the requirements for that contract to be fulfilled have, that contract has been rendered null and void, and he's just blowing smoke to try and trick Haru into thinking she has no choice, when she does have every choice she could want. She just needs people she can trust to be on her side. And with Ren's encouragement, she finds the right words to put into motion the path to her own future. And Takakura can be a supporter of her efforts too. As the Okamura Foods brand originally started with a small cafe her grandfather owned that didn't originally pull in much money, and it was her father's ambition that actually expanded it far beyond that. Takakura was a regular of the original cafe when he was younger. That's why it was his idea to reopen such stores now. So it brings things full circle for Haru to eventually be in charge of this new initiative, with someone aligned with her ideals having her back until she's ready to take the big chair for herself, as well as Takakura helping her get out of the marriage she never wanted, so she may pursue other interests. Yeah, this is another Paramore option that's not my cup of coffee. Mainly as I prefer tea, as I can't get past the taste of the beans. Which, however, actually makes me feel bad about after the options result in a deliberate phrasing of friend zone. But that as much has to do with the trust and advice obviously leading to a crush to form on her behalf. And it's not fun to be crushed by one. But, to be completely honest, I felt more like Haru needed someone in her life that could make her laugh. Case in point, the other major Haruka Tomatsu role I keep referencing in this.
私の手を貸すわよ。
ありがとう、ハリー。
あの二人もうすぐ結婚
違う種族同士が結ばれるなんて、この地球も素晴らしい星だね。
What became the deciding factor on me edging away from romancing her is something you'll only really notice when Haru's allowed to let loose as noir, and that the subversion of the expected role from Haruka Tamatsu is Haru herself has a very noticeable sadistic streak that peers through the guise of a Yamato Nadeshiko or a Joe-sama character role. And whether it's because of her circumstances or not, she has a unique willingness to express her frustrations as quite an ordeal of pain, which has thus earned Haru the endearing name of Sadistic Floof from the fandom. And despite my appreciation of tsunderes, as I've explained a couple times this year, the belligerence of a tsundere is based upon insecurity. If you don't push their buttons or help them work through what their issue is, they are perfectly loving partners. As long as you're not actually dealing with a violent bitch trying to masquerade as a tsundere, or otherwise turn their aggression towards those who would harm or take advantage of their loved ones. You're not actually dealing with a wild animal with them. Whereas with sadists, there's always that concern that if you step the wrong way with them, then the punishment will not just be in excess of the crime, but will be done in such a way that there will be pleasure taken out of it just because they can. But despite that turning me off to romancing them, Haru is nonetheless a good person and good final addition to the Phantom Thieves, especially as their financial resources would allow them operational security should their pursuit of distortions continue past the conspiracy's collapse.
ってつもりはないの。一時のやる気だけじゃ道楽だもの。勉強して腕も知識も磨かなきゃ。いっそルブランに弟子入りしようかしら。実感がこもってる。実際叶えるのはすごく大変だと思う。でも小さい頃からの夢だった正義のヒロインにだってなれたんだもの。強く思い描いて自分を信じて行動すればきっと叶うはず。よかった。あなたと会えてやっと分かってもらえる人に会えたって嬉しかったけど、今はもうそれ以上。今後は人に嫌われることもあるかもだけど、あなたがいてくれればきっと大丈夫。この恩必ず返させて。もしもあなたが大変な時は必ず助ける。もっと頼って。やれるって思えるだけの力を自分の中に感じるの。我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、女帝の究極なる非業に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
But before we move on to the main story of this chapter, there is one other confidant I've not been talking about. Primarily because it's the easiest to rank up as long as you're continuing to experiment with persona fusions and collecting the ones you can. And that is the game's twin munchkin wardens.
我は汝、汝は我。汝、ここに新たなるちぎりを得たり。ちぎりはすなわち囚われを破らんとする反逆の翼なり。我豪気のペルソナの生誕に祝福の風を得たり、自由へと至るさらなる力とならん。
Justine and Carolyn are the game's stand-in for CC, purported to be our secret confidant and collaborator, but in practice really don't do anything that truly assists the protagonist. Hell, they actually do more than CC does through keeping our Persona Compendium, performing the various executions of self, which are used to create new persona from them or otherwise itemize them, which is really more them fulfilling their duties as denizens of the Velvet Room than doing them for us, as they're more concerned with fulfilling the goals of their boss. This echoing how in Code Geass, Cece is not actually there for Lelouch, cares at all for his emotional well-being, or assists him pursuing his goals in ways that won't screw him over, but because of what she can gain from Lelouch, simply by him surviving up to a certain point, so she can gain what she wants from other benefactors. Likewise, the twins don't need to keep Ren alive for more than the point that their master deems his task over with, after which they no longer need to associate with him, and will drop him like a prom dress. This matching with the Strength Arcana, but in the reverse position. Straight up, it represents power, action, and courage, while reversed, it reflects despotism, abuses of power, discord, and sometimes disgrace. And that does fit the twins in comparison to the other Velvet Room attendants, with all the Confidant giving you is discounts to summoning back old persona, and at higher levels the capacity to fusion summon persona above the protagonist's level, but at an increased cost to performing said fusions. Well, if it's that big a deal, just activate the spell card cost down. This does not mean that they don't take advantage of the association. Throughout various points in the game, they exploit Ren's need for rehabilitation as an excuse to get out of the Velvet Room and explore the various landmarks of the greater Tokyo area we unlock. Both Justine and Carolyn getting the wrong ideas about all of them due to their inexperience dealing with normal humans, as opposed to the other assistant constructs of the Velvet Room, who in their own ways have received a better understanding of them. Though it kinda makes sense we're stuck with them in this game, and not just the game devs wanting to introduce a new one. P3's assistant Elizabeth is looking for a way to free Makoto Yuki from the circumstances of his death. Persona 4's assistant Margaret has gone after Elizabeth. Theodore, who knows, as he was a retcon introduced character in Persona 3 Portable, and only really appears as a choice for FemC. Thus, they're all occupied, leaving their youngest sibling to perform the task. As you progress through their Confidant to take them out into the world, however, something begins to feel off, such as the persona fusions with special skills they keep asking for. They all come from a list they have, but who wrote the list? This leads them to realize there are gaps in their memories that shouldn't exist, which are all associated with times before they met and even left the Velvet Room, meaning there might be more going on than either of them considered, and someone is pulling at their strings. And if that's the case, it means that the only one either of them can trust is the very inmate they've done nothing but demean and take advantage of.
問題児だ。だが、貴様が成し遂げた試練。我らは素直に感服した。
あなたはその気になれば、我々すら驚かせるほどの素養を持っている。
腐るな、戦え。貴様なら必ずや公正は、いや、どんな願いもなるだろう。必ずや破滅を乗り越えてみせろ。いいな。信じているぞ、トリックスター。必ず真実にたどり着いてみせろ。
待っていますよ。我は汝、汝は我。汝ここにちぎりを血明の絆へと転生せしめたり。絆は反逆の翼となりて魂のくびきを打ち破らん。今こそ汝、豪気の究極なる非王に目覚めたり。無尽の力を汝に与えん。
Though to wrap up their stuff, I have to hand it to their Japanese voice actress Aki Toyosaki for making the twins sound distinctly different. Something their English VA Carrie Karanen attempts but doesn't fully succeed in my opinion. It's also a bit of a surprise for Aki to have played such open aggressive sadists, as she's better known for playing the cute and harmless characters to a number of series. Yui Hirasawa from K-On! And Ueharu Kazuri from the Rail Deck series being examples of that, with the most aggressive of her characters being Medaka Kurakami of Medaka Box, alongside her being part of the music group Sphere, alongside Ayahi Takagaki, Haruka Tomatsu, and Minako Kotobuki. To once again show this entire cast list on the Japanese side is a case of everyone knows each other and worked together before. Like, Japan's actor stable is not that small for it to be as prevalent as it's been here, so I keep insisting this has to be deliberate. Moving on October 20th, Futaba's finally finished going over all the data, and has figured out what I told you all in the last 2 episodes. The Phantom Thieves were set up from at least Medjed's introduction as patsies in a scheme to deliberately take down Okamura while being left holding the bag of his death. While Futaba knows several of the people who still use the Medjed name, the one who went after them wasn't one of them, and she's found evidence on Mishima's website that it had actively been tampered with, and many of the reports of Okamura's misdeeds had been egregiously inflated. Coupled that with the massive media focus the Medjed incident brought to them, to bring them disturbing levels of sudden popularity, the exact thing they had been worried about before Morgana forced the situation regarding them targeting the wrong people actually ended up happening. Disregard Okamura's possession of a palace and Haru's previous dilemma that made the decision for them. Everything leading up to that was deliberately planted.
だから俺は言ったんだ。迂闊に飛び込むなと。なんだよ。俺のせいか。最後はてめえも同意しただろ。
Yeah, and as a reminder, they talked Ryuji down. It was Morgana that forced the issue, and is now not being blamed when Morgana's insistence has now come back to bite all of them. Again, I am taking Ryuji's side throughout all of this shit because no one else will, and they keep blaming him for things other people are responsible for, which, as said, is his trigger for him to be argumentative and aggressive. It is insanely hypocritical for them to do it too, considering that's what's happening to them in this stage of the game. This is again why I feel Morgana's apology is ridiculously insincere, because if it was genuine, he would have spoken up about him playing directly into this trap and the resultant escalation, instead of it wrongly being blamed on Ryuji again. For Morgana didn't listen to reason when Ryuji did. See why I get pissed off at this game for making him the butt monkey? As he genuinely doesn't deserve it. And it makes every other character that treats him like shit without valid reason look worse for doing so. Again, the double standards help no one, jackasses. Worse, we're not the only ones suffering the fallout, as the conspiracy has another scapegoat they're priming against us, that being Sai herself, who is being rewarded for finding evidence that Kobayakawa's suicide was anything but, and connecting it to the thieves by being given free rein to bring them in ASAP, instead of being shuffled around to other cases, all of which have been over the past few months conspicuously associated with the various palace rulers or conspiracy activities. Though there is an oddity in this, that being a prosecutor, which is a different branch of the Justice Department, is being given authority over normal police officers. This is another thing I had to look up, and there is some grounds for this in Japanese law, where prosecutors often work with investigators throughout the formation of a case and lead into prosecution. But from what I could find, any orders they may be authorized to give are more in the terms of obtaining and determining evidence and when they could go to arrest a suspect. Not so much them having the authority to literally take control of the entire police department, as that can lead to circumstances where one entirely abuses their power for personal vendettas. Which, of course, is happening here, in furtherance of the game's political allegory, pointing out this exact thing as being bad. For even Sai is shocked over the power she has been handed, as it ensures that she has the entire game rigged in her favor. The promotion she sought for so long finally assured, but if she somehow fails here with that much powder back, her career will be over due to how much of her cases in the last year have fallen through due to the mental shutdowns, psychotic breakdowns, and now the distortion destructions causing changes of heart. It's like, every time she's assigned something, it's doomed to failure. Or Akechi is the one to bring her the evidence she's overlooked that makes her prosecution a cakewalk. It's been constantly undermining the image that she's competent at what she does, even when she is. And Makoto can see clearly what this is doing to her, destroying her from the inside out as it eats away at the woman she once knew, at the obsessions over power and prestige she's garnered that started out so small, but as more and more have been the source of their arguments and distance, as if Sai can never receive the recognition she so very much deserves, even as her superiors demand of her a near-perfect 99.9% conviction rate from the cases she does bring to court. I am not kidding about that, and such is ridiculous to try and achieve. Japanese prosecutors try not to bring charges until they have an ironclad case in the first place. Thus, a public trial is usually a foregone conclusion regarding one's guilt, and a prosecutor either has to be really bad at their job, or have bad evidence, or, as we started out this game, falsified evidence pointing to one's guilt in the first place to botch such a case. And there have been a number of publicized incidents in Japan of criminal convictions being overturned on appeal due to it being found that police, or even the prosecutors themselves, falsified evidence to put someone behind bars, strong-armed a confession from a witness who had nothing to do with the crime, or someone else was framed as taking the fall while the actual perpetrator got away. It's a big thing with organized crime and Yakuza stories for a junior member to willingly confess to a crime they did not commit to protect a senior member, for example, specifically to make a prosecution's case fall apart. And the failure of the accuser's due diligence is why many criminals actually escape the justice system. Hell, that context about the Japanese legal system puts a lot better context in place regarding the series' Death Note to define just how much of a villain and protagonist Light Yagami was. Because he started out using the Death Note to kill people that were found not guilty at trial, despite the likeliness of the due diligence of the Japanese criminal justice system showing that they were actually innocent of what they were accused of, despite what appearances may seem. If the prosecution could not find the evidence for a conviction, and they still went to trial with it so that individual got off for it, that's a sign they weren't guilty to begin with. So Light's actions to summarily judge them with just the superficial appearance of guilt is downright evil. And that explaining the many hoops those attempting to catch Light have to go through in order to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was murdering his victims, as anything less than that would only be proving Light's hypocrisy correct. I swear, Death Note gets a lot better than people already think of it when you remember that it is the story of a man who misunderstands how the world works so deeply to make it a worse place with his unilateral actions. And the fact that the Netflix adaptation so screwed itself up by not understanding that is just annoying. And that same arc of Light's and how he's a monster hiding how empty he is inside is actually relevant to Persona 5's story. Beyond Mamoru Miyano being a cast member, obviously. But we're not quite there yet. For the moment, all of this is just really a tangent to make it more clear that Persona 5 is not the first popular piece of media to discuss this exact political issue. Hell, it pops up in the Yakuza and Judgment games as well to show how deep prosecutorial misconduct can go in criminalizing the wrong people, or letting actual killers walk for too long by some just not wanting to bring charges or avoid obtaining certain evidence. It's one of the reasons why Japan's criminal justice system has such a bad reputation to begin with. And the game reinforces the point by investigators under Sai's orders swarming Shujin the next day. Anyone that's been involved in recent incidents deliberately targeted and interrogated, as if they already know who to aim for and antagonize just to make them crack. And despite this only going for 2 days, the SU director is already demanding instantaneous results from Sai, which is a ridiculous expectation to find a smoking gun or confession right out of the gates, and the writing of arrest warrants when one doesn't even know if the suspect is guilty. But of course, that's the key. They don't want things done properly. They want the image of doing something, just to force through the idea that they are in the right. It doesn't matter what they're actually doing is wrong and will harm people, just so they can frame the other side as not doing their job at all, or being wrong in doing so. It's the bandwagon effect, where the optics that one side is better on an issue convinces more to side with them, even when it is against their best interests and that side is lying. And this is different from actually having evidence of guilt, as evidence of guilt can be shown or presented as existing first to validate someone being charged. But they don't have that, as they can't connect it to a motive. As a result, what happens next is unsurprising. Because Akechi has been such an outspoken critic of the Phantom Thieves, his popularity is shot through the roof in promoting his own justice over that of the thieves. Thus, both the school and the investigation team ask him to come in and look at things himself, as all of a sudden, he feels like the thieves are not the perpetrators of these latest crimes. They don't fit the pattern he's seen of them. And that leads Makoto, as the student council president, to offer him an invite to speak at the school. Yeah, this comes off as a situation where no action taken would have been better than any actions at all. But of course, with such pressure put on them from all sides, it's forcing them to make a move, instead of waiting for the enemy to make their own blunder.
Okaeri.
Case in point, I am skipping around Akechi's Confidant for a reason, but since their meeting in June, Ren and Akechi have been developing a rapport between them as rivals, the two acting as a counterpoint presenting the respective morals of the thief for the people and the detective for the government, and how much Akechi believes in systems, even when they may be or are corrupt. His appearance here being done to more force the issue in him knowing something more than he's been letting on, and moreover, to hint at something being wrong with Sai herself, though this is interrupted by the television in the cafe.
怪盗団なんてものが野放しなのは国の怠慢と言われても仕方ないでしょう。要人ばかり狙われるのを見てきっと腰が引けてるのがいるんでしょう。市民の皆様には迷惑をかけて申し訳ない。すぐに超党派会合を持って対策を講じますよ。
政治家のくせにできたやつだよな。すぐやるって言い切るとこがいいよ。
私はこの件に使命感を抱いているんです。全力で取り組む所存ですよ。悪党の勝手な世直しなんて、それこそ世直ししてやらないと。国民の皆様の関心にすぐに応えるのは政治家として当たり前の使命でしょう。
今時なんともけなげなやつだね。
What the hell are you talking about? He was literally saying nothing. Like, this is the biggest amount of nothing from a political statement since whatever the last statement made by a Republican was.
まあ、そう見えるんだろうね。でも、あれじゃあ本質を見逃してる。改心だけなら、彼らがたとえ無罪じゃなくても、僕が本当に遂げたいことと、すごく近いのかも。
Notice that he never seems to make any commitment to an opinion. Likewise, Akechi spooks the group as they hang out together during the school festival after his invite goes through, saying it's nice to see this entire group together as they are, since it makes things simple. For after he gives his speech at the event... Okay, could you be more obvious? And yeah, he makes it clear that he knows, showing off a group of photos taken outside of Okamura Foods when they got warped back out of the palace as it collapsed, revealing he's also been to the metaverse, claiming he was first warped in there a month ago when a certain MetaNav app appeared on his phone like a virus. And considering that app has spread outwards to so many people, Ren knows that is plausible, as there's not a person here that hasn't happened with, except for Haru. and him not specifying his date makes them believe that it coincided with when Morgana ported Haru into the metaverse himself. Because we don't know the specifics of how the app spreads, just that it does, there's a benefit of the doubts that can be formed around that. And this coincides with when Akechi's tune about the thieves began to change, as if he realized there was something more going on here. Him claiming that affecting someone psychologically operates under different grounds than he had been thinking before when they didn't force a confession in a way that would find them legally liable, and differs in execution from the murders, and that he claims to know who the real culprit is.
顔はわからない。仮面をかぶっていたからね。実はこの写真を撮った時、僕もあの世界に入ったんだ。そこで君たち以外の動いているやつを見た。そいつは僕を見つけるなりいきなり撃ってきた。
He also claims to have awoken a persona as well from this incident.
こいつもペルソナを？
この猫確かに喋ったよな。
What can we say? Ren's a fantastic ventriloquist. It helps him counter against all the puppeteers part of the plot. Being able to understand Morgana is enough leeway to want the others to bring him up to speed with what they've done, and is willing to strike a deal. They end their activities, and Akechi will determine the truth about the murders. Or otherwise, he'll inform the police and let them draw their own conclusions. It's an ultimatum that plainly leaves them no choice, so they're left with agreeing, especially since Sai's superiors only care about getting rid of them.
手法の客観的解明がなくとも因果関係が認定されたらそれまでだ。彼女は正常な判断ができていない。追い詰められたらそうだな。自白をでっち上げるかもしれない。
でっち上げ？
This proven as the SU director once again demands instantaneous results, which is not how investigations work. Threatening to remove Sai even though not even a single week has passed since the task force was created.
手はず通りです。
How exactly? This seems like a very bad plan. Actually, from context before, Akechi claims Sai is being put into a position where she has to begin falsifying evidence. But how would he know that? Has he seen her do it before? Has he helped her do that before when he had a suspicion? Hell, looking back on his previous appearances throughout the game, especially with his numerous television appearances, he never seems to actually have a cemented opinion. He just seems to like playing to the camera, as if he's just asking questions that deliberately don't have an answer that can be anything other than baseless speculation. Gotta say that in comparison to Naoto Shirogane, Akechi seems like a pretty terrible successor to the Detective Prince title, since he seems to make more media appearances than he spends time actually solving any cases. Hell, he only caught signs of this group being more than they were by what appears to be deliberate chance. But things go from worse to straight up apocalyptic, as Sojiro has found Futaba's calling card. Why she kept that I have no idea, but this forces a confrontation between him, Ren, and Futaba. As after Okamura, he's of course terrified of what Futaba could have done to set the thieves off. Actually, there's an AU I'm unaware of if anyone's explored it in fanfiction. What would have happened had Sojiro been dragged along into Futaba's palace? Like, you don't need to have an awakening with him or empowered with a persona. Obviously, not everyone that's ever been to the metaverse in all of the games has been warranted supernatural abilities. Nanako sure didn't in Persona 4. But it would have been interesting to see how he would have reacted to the Beast of Wrath that took Wakaba's form, and how he might have tried to defend Futaba in there from it, as he's similarly trying to do here. It's thus Futaba that set Sojiro straight, that Futaba's heart wasn't corrupted, it was under attack, and we destroyed the distortion that had been attempting to kill her to permit her recovery, which he had suspected of happening right after she walked in on her own. That of course puts him on our side, as he's seen firsthand the salvation that comes from our actions. And he would have lost the last thing he valued had they not intervened. So in tandem with achieving a blood oath with him, he's fully on our side.
第一、そんな話誰が信じる？お前らが怪盗だなんて説明できるわけない。 現行犯でもない限り無理だ。
Yeah, funny story. As the SU director unilaterally puts a bounty on the Phantom Thieves. 30 million yen for any information leading to their capture. Thankfully, we've blood-oathed everyone that knows at this point, bar Akechi, so they won't betray us. But putting out a bounty like that would lead to more chaos than anything, as any idiot will call in a tip thinking they can claim the prize, which is only gaslit by a certain prideful politician. Again, non-committal political spin. Seems like something everyone can agree with, but can just as easily be used to accuse one's enemies while excusing one's own positions. Yeah, there are two extremes on that. Either the government is too corrupt to reform and has to be replaced, or you want to dismantle the means of government so private interests can exploit and abuse the people. There is no middle ground. And again, this has been set up all game by so many of the breakdown victims being part of government.
With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen and others, Masayoshi Shido is one of the 3, technically 4 for the royal version, primary villains of the game. And on top of framing Ren for assault, he is the head of the conspiracy causing the mental shutdowns, also known by their proper name, the Antisocial Force. Though beyond this, there is a completely different reason why this guy keeps sending up red flags for those using the Japanese audio. And that's because his voice actor is Shuichi Ikeda. And while Ikeda has done other roles like red-haired Shanks, he is nonetheless best known as Char Aznable. And unlike Universal Century Gundam, where Char Aznable didn't do anything wrong, and it was the status quo warriors among the protagonists that actually kept screwing things over for everyone, Masayoshi Shido did many things wrong, all on his own. Or at least those he's contracted with did on his behalf. His arc acting instead to directly parallel Gilbert Durandal's in Gundam Seed Destiny, whom Ikeda also does voice. In that Durandal has this conspiracy forming throughout Destiny's story that actively leads members of the cast to be indoctrinated into trusting him over any other dissenting voices that rightfully oppose his agenda. See Destiny's tritagonist, Shin Asuka, a tritagonist being the third protagonist in importance who facilitates the actions of the villains, being included in that as someone indoctrinated to support the conspiracy. And with Shin Asuka's story arc deliberately intended to mimic Anakin Skywalker's fall from grace, Durandal was likewise deliberately written to be an Emperor Palpatine XP. And that is a similar arc to what Shido himself is on, manipulating events around him with help of his conspiracy and their metaverse assassin to line up events so the unaware populace will literally vote into a position of supreme power the man responsible for all the strife and suffering that's been negatively affecting people's lives.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
I feel like I should also give credit to the English dub team as well for the English casting of Shido. Though that was likely unintentional, and I think they were more thinking along the lines of Shido being a Char homage, even though that wasn't what they were going for. As Shido's English voice actor is Keith Silverstein, who has voiced Char in newer produced UC Gundam media, but also does voice Gilbert Durandal as well in the Seed Destiny HD remaster dub that Nozomi Entertainment released in 2021, years after Persona 5 itself had released, making the correct counterpart actor illusion a happy accident, but still one we got for those who'd rather play this game dubbed. However, while Shido's arc emulates Durandal's, there is still an active Code Geass parallel here, because the guy who actually put pen to paper most of Durandal's depiction also worked to undermine the latter show, as the second most active major antagonist in Code Geass happens to have the same pride-filled, spiteful, petulant, self-important, and egotistical personality that Shido showcases, as well as him leading his own cult of supernatural manipulating sycophants. You all thought I was going to say he was the equivalent to Charles instead of Victor, didn't you? Yeah, no. Vivi's a far more malicious antagonist than Charles with regards to how much they impact things behind the scenes just out of their spite, versus Charles' need for control. Moreover, both Shido and Vivi set in motion the very events that created their greatest potential enemy, as well as framed the respective heroes of the story for murder through their schemes, while in turn taking advantage of that frame job to further their own goals. And with him taking advantage of everything, that brings us back to Akechi, who warns that Sai is going to use the bounty information to fabricate a case to make up a culprit, because she is the host of a palace, and has been put into a situation where she must win at all cost, no matter how much she must compromise her personal ethics to do it. And this is where we get to a bit of a debate the fandom has had ever since the game released. When did Sai's palace actually form? There is an argument to be made that it is only recently seeded with the pressure she's had placed on her over the course of the year, especially with her growing enmity toward the Phantom Thieves doing what she wishes she could, which manifests as her palace's sin of envy. However, if you're paying attention to the long game of the storyline, how she's been the personal prosecutorial fixer of the conspiracy without her knowledge, the insane expectation of her to maintain a 99.9% conviction rate, which, spoilers, no other prosecutor is required to have to keep their jobs. The fact it is revealed in her palace that she has been forced to use falsified evidence before to produce several convictions, that falsified evidence either being provided to her or she otherwise falsified it herself, and in doing so, compromised her own morals and ethics. The institutionalized sexism of Japan's criminal justice system that actively punishes women for attempting to obtain positions above what is believed to be their station, and the fact the conspiracy literally recruited her at her father's funeral for this job, and they've been dangling that promotion in front of her face as bait ever since. Yeah, I am part of the consensus that believes her palace was seeded and began to form years ago, and everything the conspiracy is doing now is knowingly manipulating Sai's envy to their advantage, just as they have the manifested sins of nearly every other palace ruler they had their pet persona user create. I like it this way better because it explains much of Sai and Makoto's emotional distance we've likewise seen through the game. How they used to be closer than they are, and that all changed immediately after their father's death. Sai envying how Makoto has it easier than herself, even as the opportunities Makoto's afforded are because of Sai's hard work. And yet the constant stress and disrespect she sees in her work makes that vindication immediately turn to ash in her mouth. That tarnished relationship is not something that forms in short order, is indicative of something being wrong over a much longer stretch of time, between someone who has been able to keep to their convictions and one who has been forced to compromise them. And it's only Akechi's implications that infer that Sai is only now acting unusual, which he claims to only begin when she disregards his words after the point her boss is already putting pressure on her to close the case. And if she falsifies evidence, the people around her would just ignore it. Not just because they're members of the conspiracy, but because of the perception filter effect, preventing anyone from realizing the incongruities of falsified evidence used in the courts, which is another sign this has gone on for longer than just this year. For as discussed before, there is this misconception about there not being a perception filter effect caused by the formation of palaces, which the rulers benefit from, bar the last three where it is more overt that mental tampering is taking place. However, much like all the previous palaces, Sai's falsification of evidence to win cases and obtain wrongful convictions is something very easy to prove with massive repercussions and consequences attached to it. At least if someone was made consciously aware of it. and she should not be getting away with it enough for it to be a defining theme of her palace, unless something is preventing anyone outside the conspiracy enabling it to see it. And I do mean major repercussions, such as every case she ever took to court being overturned regardless of a demonstrable criminality. There's this whole thing in Chicago of a former police officer named Reynaldo Guevara, who for over 20 years framed minorities to close cases assigned to him as fast as possible through falsification of evidence, which let the actual perpetrators walk as he never identified the responsible parties, even when many of them would later commit repeat offenses. His misconduct, alongside those of others of his time, was only identified in the late 90s, and to this day, over 25 years later, his old cases are still being combed over to find and release more of the people he framed. And he's not the only one. False evidence has become such a problem clogging the criminal justice system with regards to minorities being used as scapegoats for the true perpetrators of a crime that several states have banned lying by police and consider it grounds for them to be terminated with cause due to the systemic corruption it facilitates. With Akechi's words likewise trying to imply that Sai knows more than she does about the conspiracy, and the conspiracy may try to target her in order for them to put the final nail in the coffin of placing all the blame on the Phantoms, which they cannot allow.
なぜそこまでするの？明智君にとって正義って何なの？
最低な大人。そうだね。そいつへの反骨心が僕の正義の源だ。社会のためとか理想のためとかそんな大層な理由じゃない。極めて個人的でただのくだらない恨みだ。
First words out of his mouth I've taken as truth. The thieves have a time limit of the 20th of November to change Sai's heart, and every single second of it needs to be used, beginning for the first infiltration triggered on October 29th, into the Casino of Envy, where every game is rigged, the house always wins, and where we began the story in media res. Though before we enter properly, Akechi needs a code name.
なら僕はカラスってとこかな。
First off, no! Not like a raven, like a crow. Karasu literally translates as a crow. Ravens and crows are not the same things. Second, really? Really? I will explain this response next time, but really?
真っ黒とか？むしろ逆さ。これ警戒されてるってことだ。
We're met with Shadow Sai almost immediately upon entering, and just goddamn Sai's shadow is hot. Like, I kind of lean a bit ace these days, but that punk goth look is super effective in penetrating that. She is deliberately designed so she can't be romanced, but even the people who were hypocrites about the paramour system admitted to want to have her as an option. But due to the way Sai's cognition is set up, she doesn't even really consider us a threat. To reach the higher floors that would give access to the treasure in the casino's vault, it requires the entrants become a VIP by winning the games around the casino, which despite Sai's proclamations of fairness, are all wigged in the house's favor. Because the house always wins.
大丈夫。僕に任せてくれ。いいところを見せておかないとね。
I don't feel like I need to explain much of Robin Hood, right? The fictitious Robin of Locksley, robbed from the rich to give to the poor, was declared a traitor to the crown as he opposed Prince John's usurping of the throne of England, while John's brother King Richard was off fighting the Crusades. The story's been done over and over enough over the years that I don't feel like I need to get into the brass tacks of it. My favorite depiction of the character includes Errol Flynn, Patrick Troughton, yes, the second Doctor had assisted him, and of course Carrie Ewells in Men in Tights. Though there is something that does bug me about Akechi's weapon loadout, and that while everyone else's gear are effectively conventional weapons formed from either props we buy from EY or found in the metaverse, Akechi's the odd one out in that his weapons are a laser blade and a ray gun. Hell, you can upgrade his base Lumina Saber into the freaking Quasar Saber. Like, what Sentai actor did Akechi have to kill to get that? Okay, you know what? That's fair. He did cameo in Ninja and Q Ranger. Well, okay, that joke would make more sense if the Quasar Saber was his starting weapon instead of one you can buy from Ewise. But I still don't think his futuristic sci-fi gear should be obtainable outside of the metaverse, as it stretches credulity that a sci-fi prop would turn real there, when the reason everyone else's prop weapons turn real is because they look like the genuine article that exists in normal reality, unless it's a weapon you find in the metaverse. Unless someone's built a working lightsaber or ray gun, and that's become popular knowledge, you're kind of working against the cognition of the popular consciousness for that. Unless there are just that many closet Toku fans in the country that want their transformation trinkets to be real. We already know this game's development staff were. To even begin at that task of ascending to the higher levels, we need to sneak into the back offices and security rooms of the lower floors to access a terminal that can supply us a gambling ID card. Long story, it's something Japan does in an attempt to stamp down on gambling addiction. To even get to the main floor, with Futaba creating 2 of them, which is just a bit too obviously deliberate. Shadow Sai greets us again when we get to the main gambling floor, her telling us how much we have to win from the games, with no guarantees we'd win from them at all. Just as Sai felt that the cases she was handed had no guarantee she would win them, just as she was made to think that she would lose everything if she failed at her prosecutions.
サイさんは昔からこうではなかったんだろう。
お姉ちゃんが正義を見失ってしまったのはきっと欲望が歪んだせい。
それってパレスができたきっかけってこと？
お父さんが死んだことと関係してると思う。お姉ちゃん全部一人で抱えてしまって、生活費を稼ぐことや男社会での出世、そして正義とは何か、それらが重みになって心を歪ませてしまったのかもしれない。
Just to confirm for you all that I wasn't talking out of my ass about their arc.
こんな本格的なのやったことないよ。みんなは
Well, yeah, gambling games are deliberately kept out of the hands of minors to prevent addictions from forming in adolescence, as they are much harder to kick after that point. Well, at least that was true before the 2010s, and gacha mechanics became more common, as Japanese law makes it so, unless you're a regulated outlet for gambling, then any prize contest or gacha mechanic has to give you something, even if it wasn't what you were after.
This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy. Trembly away!
Full casinos, however, while they are rare in Japan, don't necessarily have that regulation. And as said, Shadow Sai's palace has every game rigged from the start, her tactics making it so there are no ways around winning at the games she's set up, but you can't win them. Not without intentionally cheating ourselves to get around the house rules. Though the defects in her palace undermined her own lockouts, many of the cognitions and shadows here only caring about their own victories, and not seeing that everyone is playing fairly, or considering others' needs, or operating by different rules. Fortunately, Futaba is the key to victory throughout the floors, her permitting us to hack the slot machines, and unfix the dice tables, which awards us enough gambling currency to move up to the high roller floors, with it showing that Sai's shadow is a very sore loser. Yeah, it's not a gamble if the evidence is there to prove the crime. But as I've said, this is all proof to the player that Sai, thanks to her unknowingly being the criminal fixer of the conspiracy, has compromised her morals just to get ahead, only for that goal she has done this all for to constantly be snatched away from her again and again. She can't win for losing. Kobayakawa, with his carrot of that recommendation, was trying to get Makoto on that same path, only for the intervention of her awakening, cementing that she will not fall down the same path her sister did, where she would be forced into situations that would compromise her morals. That contrast is why her involvement is so important, as it then becomes narratively cohesive to the entire structure of the game. There is, however, a second requirement to reach the high roller floors, though, that being the approval of Sai to be there, which we can trick her cognition over by just being present in the courtroom during one of her cases, which she wasn't able to hand over to another prosecutor simply because of the expectations placed on her by her superiors, thinking so any case she was assigned she could not abandon, Akechi framing it as her being a perfectionist, when the reality is far more sinister. With access to the high roller floor now open, we have another 2 games to complete. The first is a dark room maze which literally has no exit, that in fact hidden by the darkness that Joker's Eye of Detection ability, granted much earlier in the game by Igor, lets us divine, as well as the ventilation shortcuts and hidden doors that reach around the maze. That of course representing how going through the legal process to prove one's guilt or innocence can be a labyrinth to navigate due to all the legal red tape that can be thrown up in one's way, which requires a lawyer's intervention to even discover the proper case law. The other being a gladiatorial battle arena that makes it so only one of our party can actually fight the chosen demon, reflecting how in ancient times one's guilt or innocence could be determined by a trial of ordeal. If one survived the ordeal weighed against them, they would go free, whereas one's death would determine their guilt. Trials of ordeal are historically some of the most rigged means of determining guilt in existence, the most popularly known being the witch trials of Salem in the 1700s, where those judges would always sentence a woman to death just from the accusation of them being a witch, with the expectations that the woman would either die or save her own life through witchcraft and thus out themselves. But the overt logical fallacy was what made them terrible. If you did it, they're just gonna kill you. And if you didn't do it, you're going to die anyways. And in fact, the witch trials were the last ever trials by ordeal, primarily because literal centuries before them, they had been outlawed worldwide because very often investigators would find they either found and punished the wrong person, or the actual perpetrator, because of the skills they had to commit the crime in question, would then end up getting them off scot-free. A literary example of this actually involves Arthurian lore. Lancelot and Guinevere were in several versions of the story guilty of adultery. However, Lancelot had a right to face those who accused him of this in battle as part of a trial of ordeal that would prove whether he or his accuser were in the right. As Lancelot was the strongest knight in the land, he would always win in these trials. Thus, while he and Guinevere continued to commit infidelity, they would never be held accountable for it. You see what's wrong with that? Trials by ordeal stopped because of these sorts of hypocritical situations becoming more and more recognized to be unjust. The witch trials being the last ones held more because the community that committed them were extremist religious zealots who refused to change their ways, and thus why witch hunt as an idiom came to represent persecution unfounded by any evidence to support the claim. Because anyone could claim someone was a witch, but no one could present any evidence to prove the accusation. They would have to make it up or showcase something completely unrelated as proof, despite that doing nothing to substantiate their claim. This is why they ended up replaced by trials of oath, where one swears that they are telling the truth and must find 12 people that were to believe their account, usually by providing some form of validation to their claims to give them credibility over the accusations of others, which then became the foundation for the modern-day trials by judge and jury, where the juries would be screened for bias for or against the defendant, just to make sure that no one that was asked to swear that oath to determine guilt would have a personal stake in letting off or convicting the accused. And in fact, the trial by oath is itself an evolution of a legal wager, which is just like it sounds, where the two involved parties would lay down financial stakes upon their ability to prove their side to an arbiter. Though obviously legal wagers have more in common with civil cases in modern times, as opposed to criminal cases. But that is again why Sai's palace manifested as a casino, as to wager something is to gamble on the results, even when the outcome should be a foregone conclusion. But even when we win both cases, much as Sai's promotion keeps being yanked just out of reach, this end goal we've overcome all odds to approach gets pulled away. The required amount of coins having been raised by greed to be just above the currency we have. It only being because Akechi retained the second gambling card Futaba made, and him using that card to borrow from the gambling den's banking system, which we never exploited ourselves, that this is not a total wash, opening the path to Sai's shadow once the treasure is manifested. Funny story. This is the last chance to do a lot of things in preparation for the confrontation with Sai, it being advised by the game to not send the calling card until the absolute final day plausible, which is in turn entrusted to Makoto to deliver.
功を競う者たちへの妬みそねみに我を忘れ、出世欲に取りつかれたる嫉妬の罪人、新島サイドの。
I'm not jealous. I'm envious. Jealousy is when you're worried someone will take what you have. Envy is wanting what someone else has. What I feel is envy.
Wow, he's right.
出世のため不正義すら正義と唱える不実。本当によこすとはね。罪人でもない私を改心バカにして都合の悪い人間を消したいだけのくせに。正々堂々行きましょう。そろそろ戻るから。この仕事が片付いたらちょっと落ち着くと思うの。そしたら2人で温泉でも行こうか。
お姉ちゃん、私ね、お姉ちゃんの味方だよ。誰にも手出しさせないから。
変な子。
But as Sai informs her bosses that she's the next target, she learns they already know, and that she's already lost control of the investigation, as it was never actually hers to begin with. And thus we come to the end of this 100-hour flashback arc. Yes, seriously, the battle with Sai's shadow is contained in the 101st video I filmed of this game, which all average out to an hour each.
殉職した時、犯人を心底憎んだわ。正義の殉職って言えば美談だけどね、残された方はたまんないわよ。私がどれだけ苦労したと思ってるの。
僕の買いかぶりすぎでしたかね。もっと高尚な言い分だと思ってましたけど。
まさに暴走。こんなの間違ってる。
正義は悪に屈してはならない。私は勝たなければならないの。
ただの独りよがりだ。
どちらが正しいかは戦って決めればいい。
But as I said earlier as well, Makoto's motive as a thief echoes the justice epitomized by a rebel outside the system, so it matters just as much that her thematic counterpoint on this in her sister, on top of once again attempting to rig the system to make herself in the right, manifests its monster form in the same way Kamen Rider villains would try to justify themselves. That it is their world, and they have the right to do as they please because of it. A distorting evil seeking to make the world go wrong, as the world serpent Leviathan. And oh boy, are there a lot of interpretations of Leviathan out there, though it is most closely associated with envy in Judeo-Christian mythology, with the beast devouring the souls of the dead to prevent them from ascending to the heavens because it itself cannot climb to those heights. In Gnosticism, the Leviathan is in fact represented by the Ouroboros Ophis, or serpent, the one who acts as a barrier against reaching to and contacting the divine in order to maintain an existing system over the world. If one attempted to undergo the trials to reach a divine messenger or god, any failure or hesitance would in turn lead to one being devoured by the Ouroboros, aka Leviathan, only for them to start from zero back where they began, as one trapped as part of the system of the world. Thus, one claiming to hold a gate of Ouroboros was to claim someone had already undergone the trials needed to ascend the heavens and make contact with the divine, or otherwise was marked as someone who would be granted free passage through the realms Leviathan watched over. Consequently, Sai's demon form is strong against everything, and explicitly repels Makoto's power, but it has no resistances to psychic abilities, reflecting how Sai has been psychically manipulated from the start, and how her presence in this herself would prove her accusations against the thieves as wrong, which is something Sai cannot accept due to all the sacrifices she has made.
法で裁けない悪を明るみに出して断罪すること、それは間違ってないと思う。怪盗団だってそういう意志で動いてる。でも手柄のために強引な捜査をしたり、真実をねじ曲げようとしたり。ねえ、検事になるって決めた時の気持ち思い出して。それがお姉ちゃんの正義でしょ。
私の正義。
思い出して、昔のお姉ちゃんを。
私は。
新島さんもお父様もそう。何がきっかけで変わっちゃうの？
確かに欲望が原因といっても、歪んで偏った思考に陥るなんて本人の知らない原因でもあるのか？
Oh, is there ever? But you won't find it listed on the wikis because oh so very many people missed that there is in fact a trigger for them. I didn't. I've been saying that the palaces have been seeded by the creator of distortions all this time. But even with Sai confronted and Ryuji and Yusuke grabbing the treasure, something's wrong. Sai's palace hasn't begun to dissolve. And worse, the conspiracy's assassin has not just not appeared, but has instead brought reinforcements in the form of the police that have been collaborators on the conspiracy, who are all waiting for them to come out. For as the casino represents, you cannot win when the entire game is rigged against you. And thus, we finally come full circle. Ren acting as bait alongside Sai's treasure to allow everyone else a chance to escape, the Phantom Thieves disbanding as their leader is caught, tortured, drugged, and finally placed before their judge, jury, and executioner. For as the tale completes itself and the flashback ends, the conspiracy hasn't been brought down, the genesis of the palaces undiscovered, the secrets of Mementos still hidden in the dark, just as it's been shown that none of the confidants we bridged connections with to obtain blood oaths from ever betrayed us either, because they were never meant to be in the first place. For in truth, there's only one person it could have been, one person who from the start we've ever seen who has been making slip-up after slip-up, and thematically is the only person that could ever be the killer, and consequently, the protagonist's executioner. Isn't that right, Suzaku?
何を？
これがくだらない正義の慣れの果てだ。